revenue operations strategist, Cameron Collins here. We've got Mark. Mark, I'll let you introduce yourself because I feel like I always end up doing it for you.
Thank you. My name is Mark Lerner. I'm the Director of Growth Marketing at DealHub. We are a CPQ, CLM, billing, subscription management solution, native integration with HubSpot and other CRMs as well. I'm also a LinkedIn top, the one with the blue top voice, LinkedIn top voice. You're in the presence of greatness. But I saw that, Cameron, your job title now says something about like forensic revenue or something like this.
We'll get to that. Yeah, I think it says forensic admin. We'll talk a little bit about that shortly. It's not my job title, but we'll talk a little bit about what it means to be a forensic admin because there's some tie in here to our main theme today with our guest, Tanner Green. We'll be talking about artificial intelligence. Tanner, I'll let you introduce yourself, but for those who haven't got the 411, he is an artificial intelligence guru, built an entire company around helping sales enablement with AI. So Tanner, take it away.
How do we know you're not an artificial intelligence yourself? You have to make you do a puzzle or something.
Yeah, yeah, you have to do those recaptchas. Dude, honestly, AI is getting pretty good at following those too. It's crazy. Oh yeah, like you said, I'm Tanner Green. I am the founder of the company called Next LVL AI. We are an automated AI data entry software for sales reps. So every time they get off a call, you don't have to worry about entering data in the CRM or updating deals or crap like that. It's just, we do it all for you. And so we have an AI piece that gathers understanding and goes through, and I can dive into the super weeds, but I'm not going to. It's our secret sauce, to be honest. But think of us as an otter or fireflies, maybe a Voma, but instead of on the sales coaching side, we go into more on the sales enablement, moving pipelines, moving deals through the stages, updating direct properties, stuff like that, without lifting a finger and without any direct insight or any direct handholding. So it's pretty cool.
So what I'm hearing is if I'm an organization that says my reps don't need Gong to tell me where the keywords are, and I don't need a Voma to tell me what the highlights are, but I want them to be able to get on a call, do their thing, and then have details from that call affect things in HubSpot. Y'all are the go-to for making that happen.
Exactly. Yeah.
Ooh.
Yep. So we're complementary to all of those, like Gongs or the Vomas of the world.
I think that's awesome because being in revenue operations, I talk to a lot of organizations that specifically want just that, right? Like they don't need quote unquote AI, Gong, communication intelligence, right? They don't want a program saying, this is where you got an objection. This is what you should say. Yeah, that can be helpful, but there are also a lot of organizations that they rely on their leadership to facilitate that. And what they want is more the enablement piece, which is why I'm really excited to have this conversation today because sales is my jam.
Love it. I love it.
So before we get into some of the background on how this works in HubSpot and your application of AI, go ahead and tell everyone a little bit about your inspiration getting to this point. Like, how did Next LVL come about? How did you end up becoming the AI guru for sales enablement?
Oh, dude, you opened up a can of worms there. So it actually started when I was in college. This is like a full kind of story piece that's fun. So I was in electrical engineering. That's what I graduated in. And I was doing two things while this is crazy, man. I was an absolute, just entire crazy person for doing this. So my junior year, we were taking a bunch of software classes and for electrical engineering, and I sucked at it, dude. I was terrible. And I've been a good student my whole life. Like school is pretty natural to me. And so I was like, great, this is fun. And that's why I did electrical engineering, because I was like, I'm good at math. I can understand stuff. I might as well get a career that pays me the most money. That was my literal thought. And then I ran into CS and I was like, whoa, I don't know how to do any of this. So in order to like really progress my career, I decided to do a minor in it. And so I was taking upper level electrical engineering classes, and I was doing a minor in computer science. And then I was a TA for a CS class. And then I joined the research lab for UAVs called the Magic Lab at BYU. and I was doing software there, and I was doing software plus machine learning for all of the path planning for UAVs, which is pretty wild. And then I joined the Mars rover team at BYU, and I became the captain of their team handling the science and the automation AI computer vision side. So I was doing all five of these things all at once for 2 years straight. And it was like the busiest time I've ever, it's not even close. Like I was so busy. It was crazy. People are like, "Oh, I'm too busy," but I've never been that busy ever. So nowadays, I'm like, "Yeah, I got time. I'm fine." But anyways, that being said, all of that experience gave me a ton of understanding of like how to code and how to use AI to code. And then I ended up wanting to go and do a master's in robotics and control systems, but I dropped out because I didn't really like it and I wasn't a huge fan of the research and I was burnt out, to be honest. I just wanted to be done. And so I got a job at a Silicon Valley startup. They were pretty early on, but they still had a lot of employees. And so their company is called Domino Data Lab. They were like Databricks. Have you guys ever heard of Databricks? It's like a Databricks competitor. So it was all about it's creating a platform for data scientists to create, deploy, and maintain all of their machine learning models and AI models and processing. So for example, Domino Data Lab is one of their clients is Johnson& and Johnson. And so Johnson& and Johnson used Domino Data Lab to create a bunch of models to figure out a solution to the COVID-19 virus. Pretty cool. And so part of my job was working hand in hand with NVIDIA, partnering with them in creating a dynamic computing power for like algorithms to sort out dynamic computing power depending on how big your model is, how many parameters you got, and what you're actually processing, and then actually provide the right amount of GPUs in order to not waste money and not waste time. And it's a really cool opportunity for me to do that. But then in 2022, the fall, actually in like December, I got laid off and I was like, okay, maybe I'll get a new job. And I was like, I'll do software still. So I got hired onto a company that I will not name. And
I know
before
where
I
this
even
is going.
started, before I even started, I got laid off,
Yeah.
like literally before I even started. So they hired me on. They're like, yeah, super stoked to work with you. And then I kept messaging them. I was like, hey, when are we starting? All this stuff. And then a week later, they were like, hey, man, sorry, but finance turned you down. Like they rescinded your offer and the job doesn't exist anymore. And I was like, what the freak, dude? This is insane. And so that was last year, in actually about a year ago to the date. And so all these couple of years had just been leading up to this moment where I'm like, okay, screw it. I'm just gonna do my own thing and figure it out. And so I was at a networking event and decided to build this AI kind of email categorizer and prioritizer. And it was really cool because it would take in all your emails and be like, all right, this is the most important one. We'll bubble it up. We'll send a meeting. We'll send a little piece guiding you on what you should say, whatever. And it was pretty cool, but it was really expensive and nobody was willing to pay that much for our software. So I was like, oh crap, what are we going to do? So we actually got brought on by a RevRo. It's called RevRo. They're a venture services firm. So I didn't know anything about startups, no idea, and nothing. I didn't know anything about sales either, or HubSpot really, which is crazy. So we came in and they brought us on and they're like, look, we love what you guys are doing. We believe in you as a founder and we want to push something forward. And I was like, great. So then came on and told us everything we needed to know about like how to actually start a business and how to do market research, how to ask questions, really get customer feedback and all of that stuff. And I was like, this is great. Let's work on this. So we pushed away the email thing and we started asking questions all last summer. Turns out, ding ding, sales reps suck at entering data in the CRM.
Yeah.
And I didn't know this
Shocking
at all.
news.
I know. I didn't know this. And for us, it was like this huge like discovery of, dude, nobody knows this. It's crazy. And then I started talking to everybody. It turns out everybody knows this and it's a massive problem. And I was just looking into the solution. I was like, man, why hasn't anyone like solved this problem? And I knew I was like, I could do it. We could make this happen. So I brought on my co-founder. We met playing pickleball the year before randomly. And he was in startups and we were just talking about that kind of stuff before I was even in startups. And I brought him on, I was like, dude, Dan, well, let's do this. Let's make this happen. So he came on and then went to inbound as like our final A/B test of, are we going to do this solution or this solution? The first solution was creating a map software for understanding how to take all of your CRM sales process and map it in like a lucid chart format. Super just doing that already. And so that was like our first one. And then the second one was an AI automated data entry software. And that one landed way better. And then that was the full bore, like, okay, let's do it. Let's jump in. That was in September at Inbound. And we started building it. We finished the whole build in December, and now we've brought in a ton of clients. We've got our hands full right now. So I still need to change the website because we had some beta, but we don't have availability more. So I need to change that. But it's been really fun and it's a crazy adventure, dude. And like we've just been working so freaking hard to make this work and to get it working for people and to create an awesome software that people really need a solution for. So that's the long-winded story. So I apologize if you need to cut that out at all, but it was
There's no cutting.
perfect. Yeah.
No, that was awesome. I have so many questions, but the first one is
Yeah.
which is harder, working on like a rover for Mars or building a startup?
Dude, honestly, that's a good question because the Mars rover thing, there was a ton of problems and like problems to solve. And there's things they give you
Ground
new.
distance.
So we're not NASA. It was just a
Yeah.
BYU. But what's really interesting is they always give you new rules every year to change it up. So you actually have to mix things around. And so we had just a ton of different rules that year. And it was also during COVID. So it was pretty hard to like really get everybody on the same page. And we actually didn't even compete that year because of COVID, which was lame. But that was really cool experience for me because not only did I learn how to solve complex problems with people, but I learned how to lead. Like I was in charge of 15, 20 guys and gals. There's a few girls on the team, but and so we all had to like work together and figure it out. And I was like, I failed so much at leadership, but I'm just like this senior college student trying to figure it out. And that was really hard. The leadership piece was especially challenging.
So it's got to be interesting for you. It sounds like you were in this space before it became a household name, right? So there was probably a niche group of people that were like in machine learning and AI and was assumed to be like this very specialized thing. And then in November of 2022 or whatever it was, ChatGPT explodes and everybody and their mother is talking about is acting as an expert, right? And so I would imagine that was probably a lot of eye rolls in the way people were talking about it. But there's got to be you came with a lot more context. What do you, I think you jumping right into the kind of topics, like what are some of the common mistakes that you saw or misunderstandings of what AI is that people, especially early on, were talking about and might still have today?
Yeah. So the early on piece, what was funny was people didn't really know that it didn't like, first of all, it didn't go on the internet. It didn't search it does now, but it didn't like search through the internet. And they thought it was like this free thinking, legitimate, like artificial intelligence being that could like reason and connect dots and stuff like that. And I think that was the biggest piece for me where I was like, this is like a solidified outcome based on tokens from millions, probably billions or trillions of pieces of data that all connect this crazy like neural network and all of these underlying principles of creating the AI piece. And so that was like the number one thing where I was like, people just don't understand that it's not just like free thinking. If you give it these specific pieces, it's going to go through and find whatever different information relates to all of these little bits and pieces of your sentence and bring it back into a contextual realm. And there's a neural network, and then there's lots of underlying machine learning methods and models that I'm not going to go into that lie beneath it in order to make that actually happen. So that's like the first piece where I was like, it's deterministic, right? But it's not. So that's where natural language processing gets really tricky for people. And I think that's where people get surprised when it hallucinates and stuff. Where is this coming from? How does this happen? And it's just it happens to go down one wrong path and just keeps going down this weird path. And you're like, brings this random piece, and you're like, this has nothing to do with what I just had. And you're right, it doesn't. But that's because it was guided down that road.
So here's a question that I've got then, because obviously you work heavily in the world of sales. Everything you do revolves around sales enablement. And a question that oftentimes comes across the conversations I tend to have often involves the quantifiable versus the unquantifiable. And so I'm sure there's a secret sauce that you can't share certain details on, but how do you go into building a model on quantifying certain elements of a sales process or certain keywords? Is that something that you have built as a part of, or like through beta testing with Next Level, or those conversations that you've had, or is that something that's like totally outside the scope and every business, they import the calls and the keywords and the rest is just up to them?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when you're talking quantifiable, can you give me an example?
So I'm a company, I have an ICP, and I work with healthcare companies. And so if I'm talking to an organization and the term healthcare comes up, maybe that then impacts my lead score to add 5 points to lead scoring. So
Okay.
that being one example, but the implication there being pretty large.
Right,
Like, how
right.
would you, from a data perspective, an AI perspective, right? Your role at your company, how would you go about thinking about something like that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in what we've been able to build, there are pieces where we are going strictly off of the, as far as the quantifiable piece goes, what we're thinking about is what are the things that actually move the needle forward and make sure that they can be so, we're going to go into a little bit what we have planned out, but like the solid outputs that we're thinking of creating. I think in a sales, in general in sales, and like I said before, like I didn't know anything about sales last year, like a year ago. But what I've been able to find is there are there's not an infinite amount of outcomes in a sales call, right? There is a finite amount of things, and there's just like specific answers that you can go through and piece together within a sales call. And if the flow works, it's all about the flow, is probably the best way to put it. Because once the discovery call, for example, we're on a discovery call and we're talking about qualification data. So I'll give you an example for our company, actually. One of the qualifications for us is we don't want to work with a company that has less than 10 sales reps in a call or on their team right now because of bandwidth. And so we're just like, hey, let's just not worry about that. So if we were to talk about, okay, how many sales reps you got? AI can pick up how many sales reps, pick up the number directly afterwards, and then input it directly into a quantifiable piece of information that then can determine it's a no-go for us. This is an automatic piece. If that helps, I feel like there's a lot of different ways we can go. Lead scoring can get tricky because lead scoring can be esoteric in the way that people decide what makes a good lead and what doesn't. And so that really depends on all of the contextual basis of the company. And so when we're getting into a piece of developing that software, a lot of it is going to come from the direct information that the company uploads in their entire sales process inside of the CRM. And a company like Supered, for example, they have a lot of definitions and a lot of points that make it really clear cut. But when you don't have that, there needs to be some general basis. So that's where it comes into where we really pride ourselves on is here are the general terms that a sales process should go through. And then once we see the company's CRM, it comes into a piece where the rubber meets the road. And that's where we want to make sure that the quantifiable data doesn't get miscued and just leave it up to the sales rep for now, because I don't trust AI to make that decision. If that's what you're talking about, like that piece of information can be tricky. When you leave it up to an AI of, hey, where should we go for lunch? Should we go to Chili's or should we go to Texas Roadhouse? That's where I don't trust AI very much because there is no, what they're basing off of. AI is all about the past. It's all about past data, definitions, quantifiable pieces of information that we've already taken in place. Anytime we get to the future of AI, should we make this future decision? That's where it gets tricky. That's where it gets really hard. And AI can't really do that, honestly. It might be able to get to there yet, but it's all about the information that it's already taken in. And so when you have a sales process that's defined and outcomes are clear, that's where it gets really cool, where AI can do a lot of fancy, fun work. And that's where the quantifiable piece comes in, because then you can determine if we do this, then that happens. If this happens, then that happens. And then I'm just jumping into the fuzzy inputs to the solid outputs right now, because I think this is relevant. So what the natural language processing has enabled machine learning algorithms to do is take that fuzzy data. When I talk about fuzzy data, I'm talking about natural language or something that is not clearly defined, but guided and can be guided into a clear path. So when I'm saying I love baseball, so I'm going to take baseball for example. So if we're talking about a crowd of people watching a game and somebody's just in the stands watching a pitch, right? And the pitch happens and the guy swings and he walks back to the dugout. What's your inference from that? How many strikes were there? He struck out, right? So he had 2 strikes to begin with. And that's a context that we just inherently think about, right? We don't know, like nobody really, but there are people that have never seen baseball before. Like, why do they just go to the dugout? And then you have to explain, oh, there were 2 strikes. He swung, he missed. Then he goes back to the dugout because that's an out. 3 outs make a half inning and so on and so forth. But when AI knows that stuff already, it doesn't have to rethink and relearn the whole game of baseball. It just says, oh, he struck out. Boom, check mark, check the out, struck out. Without any context, without anything, just jumping straight into it. So that's an example of taking a fuzzy input to a solid output, because that way the AI really knows without having to dive in and have all this background. And so the background, like I said, comes from all the past. And so when you have something that goes through a natural language, now we're talking about a sales process. When somebody's, oh yeah, dude, we just had our final rep. We've only got 5 reps left in our company. I didn't specifically ask how many sales reps do you have, and then have those keywords play in some sort of keyword finder. It just naturally came up. And that's what I consider a fuzzy input, where it's like, it doesn't really mean anything. And it wasn't really a direct question that I asked. It was just part of the conversation. But because of that inference and how natural language processing is so good right now, is so good, then it can turn those fuzzy inputs into those solid outputs. Oh, they have 5 sales reps. Check.
I think that it gets pretty complex below the surface. Someone who might be more a bystander, let's say, in the AI world is, oh, there's ChatGPT, you ask it a question, it gives you an answer. But especially if you're following things right now, there's all sorts of tooling that is creating this ecosystem. And amongst that are the use of like vector databases and agents and chains, and essentially enabling a model to either have more knowledge than it was trained with, or able to access certain types of knowledge at a given time. How does that all work? And like, what is the impact of that on the usefulness of AI for, let's say, in the sales world, especially?
Oh, that's a great question. Vector databases are an incredible tool for AI to pick apart. And it's almost like taking think of it as taking little snapshot of natural language processing pieces and then turning that into like you said, Cameron, like a quantifiable piece of data. So what's really cool, this is something that I learned actually in college, and a wild, complex system that humans can't even comprehend, where a vector database is essentially a storage piece of a combination of different what's called embeddings. So if we're taking a paragraph, that whole snapshot of that paragraph is all of the different the combination of those letters put together creates that paragraph that can be snapshotted and then stored into a vector database that's like pointing in one direction. And so when we think of vectors, a vector is you can think of it as like an arrow where it starts at one piece and then points in a specific angle. However, what's crazy about vector databases is they have 1,500 dimensions. So instead we have 3D, right? And if you're like, oh, this is pointing at XYZ angle, boom, right there. And this one's pointing over here. These vectors are pointing in 1,500 different directions that we can't even comprehend. And so what that means is if we bring it back into the 3D space and compare it, if I talk about a cat, like I've got a cat, this is the vector of the cat, right? It's pointing this direction, my elbow's right here, it's going up at this angle, great. And then I've got a dog that's like right here. And now people looking at it, if you're watching this live, you're like, what's this guy doing? But the piece right here is the dog has the same starting point. Because why? They're both mammals, they're both furry, they're both pets, they both have eyes, ears, mouth, nose, whatever. But they're slightly different because of the way that they are. We all know cats and dogs are different, but they're very similar in that way. So when you talk about mapping these together, there's different angles. There's the azimuth angle, there's the difference between the peaks, like the position of the point where it starts. Those are how AI can map things together and create this crazy intricate network together to say, oh, a cat is like a dog, right? We all know that. But because of this really specific definition of these embeddings and these vector databases, you can bring out contextual information and then you can place it straight directly with an AI model that has no context at all and say, oh, it looks like this is pretty similar to what I'm seeing right now. Let's connect the two together. And so that is where vector databases, tool chains, bucketing can really make a huge difference in where we're going with AI. And that way, people have talked about, oh, this training with 72 billion parameters or whatever. Like, this is a reason why people have been able to lessen the amount of parameters and still have the same amount of results. And that is where you have this natural language processing for this fuzzy input. And then you have the vector database, you have tokenization, you have classification, all of these little pieces underneath it that create these buckets where the natural language processor can act somewhat as a human and be like, oh, looks like this fits over here. So I'm just going to take this piece and then place it in this bucket and then store it for later. So then if I have a new thing come up, I can look in these buckets and see where does it match? What happens? And then that's where this, what they call tool chain, can really make an impact on AI. And you have this natural language processing LLM, ChatGPT, for example, that lays on top of all of these specific, really quantifiable machine learning algorithms and models.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of tech people out there that, like Mark, I'm sure, are excited. And then I'm sure
I
there's
get 25% of it, and I'm still every day I'm trying to get like 1% more.
Hopefully my explanation was as clear as I could make it.
Yeah,
well,
no, I think I got 2% more now. As opposed to
well,
1%.
and really gaining any percentage of understanding of how artificial intelligence works, if you're not a dedicated expert, that's a huge win. I want to take this then to a higher level where anyone in sales is thinking with them, what's in it for me, right?
Yeah.
How does this impact me? And
Mm-hmm.
something you've mentioned consistently, which I really love from an operations and sales perspective, is the notion of a decision tree. And so if we go back to the idea of a discovery call, for example, there's one of two outcomes. You book a meeting or you don't. And everything you do narrows you to that outcome. And that was something that I really love the notion of, because when I was in sales, that was literally how I would approach my calls is this is going to end one of two ways. How do I make sure that my decision tree of words leads me to yes, meeting booked, deal closed, etc. And so I think it is so cool that now we can take something that is probably intuitive to many salespeople, but then put it into data and code and machine learning and all of this, and then create tools and resources that help to enable sales reps. And so I want to take a second here to let you like really just let Next Level shine. But what are some of the ways that sales reps and companies are using the software and using what you've built to help them succeed? What are some wins and success stories and just like real world use cases that you've had?
Yeah, that's a great way. Thanks for bringing me back into reality, Cam, because sometimes I get lost in all this stuff because it's so interesting, right? But let's take a real world example, a playbook, a simple playbook. When somebody has a playbook, I'll give you a company that we were going to work with. Unfortunately, they couldn't use one of our integrations due to some other restrictions. But this is a prime example of what this company or any company using this approach, sales approach, would just fit perfectly for. They have a bunch of SDRs making calls, and what they're asking are this qualification data. It's their playbook. And what's cool about what we can build is not only can we say how many sales rep, or let's say for this example, they're talking about how long have they been in business, and you get this X amount of years, 5 years, 6 years, whatever. What's cool about this is we can get their first question is like, oh, how long have you guys been in business? And not only can we get the amount of years that they have, but we can also get the fact that they asked the question or not. Did it happen? Was that question asked inside of this transcript, inside of the call? When you're talking about decision tree, the first piece is, hey, did they ask this question? How many years have you guys been in business? Yes or no. So that way, the sales manager doesn't have to go and listen to all of these calls and figure out, like, oh, let me listen in and listen. Did they ask the question or not? Yep. Okay. Got it. Boom. Next call. Listen to this. Did they ask the question or not? It's already inside of the CRM. It's in a checkbox, in a property, in a field right there, just saying, hey, you asked this question. Great. Move on to the next playbook or next question here. The next question of the playbook, I'm just going to do 3, for example. The second one is they asked what their, let's just say the budget, because everybody knows the budget, what their budget is. So when they say we don't have a budget, or our budget is X, or our budget is this, you can put that into a drop-down information, and we can fill that drop-down because now we have the ability to understand buckets and natural language processing. Like our software can understand, oh, this is what they just said in the conversation, and it matches $5,000 to $10,000. That's their budget in between there. Done. Perfect. And then the third question is, did they make an offer? Did they set a meeting for the AE to close the deal? And so that piece is, did they do it or not? Yes or no? And then what is the date and who is it going to be with, or depending on how they do it. But that is the data that we can grab. And then you're done. The call's done. They move on to the next call. All of that information is directly inputted into the CRM.
That is awesome because to the point that you had mentioned in the show notes where people suck at entering data, I think that's every revenue operations, every HubSpot admin will say to one degree or another that just telling people to do something is a pretty significant portion of their role. It's definitely not a non-zero event that occurs if we're looking at this in, I guess, math speak. And so this brings me to, I think, like a really fundamental question, which maybe it's a little bit more philosophical than anything, but I know that you subscribe to the fact that artificial intelligence, AI, like it's a dangerous word or it's a dangerous notion. And I know that we've touched the surface a little bit about this. So I'm curious to hear your take on, first and foremost, like where's the line between it's a simple code that follows a simple decision tree that creates a simple output, and this is artificial intelligence. Does the community have a clear consensus on where that line is, or is that still a super gray area where AI has just become a catch-all term for this seems like a smart thing that does stuff I didn't know?
Yeah, that is a great question. And so the reason I think AI is a dangerous word is because the term artificial intelligence is this gigantic open word for everything else that lies within it. So there's machine learning, there's LLMs, there's natural language processing, there's tokenization, there's classification, there's deep learning, there's neural networks, there's kernel regressions, there's like all of these things that live inside of AI. And so when people just blanket cover like, oh, AI will do it, that is where it gets so dangerous, because the piece that ChatGPT does really well is one like piece of the AI. And it's like language learning model, natural language processing to and to be able to grab all of that data from the world's internet. That is not necessarily that's a small piece of what AI totally is. Because when we're talking about intelligence, real intelligence, the key differences that humans have between artificial intelligence and robots and that kind of stuff is, one, we can make a connection. Not like a human, we can't make a human connection, but we can connect weird dots from things. Like penicillin was created on an accident. And like no robot would have found that out. Would have just been like, oh, this could be applied to having this crazy world-changing medicine. Or the singleton, I'm not going to go into that. Actually, that's way nerdy in computer science, but there's a lot of things that were created because somebody saw something in something else and applied it in this piece. And that's where robots just can't do that. Like, that's just not how it works. And the second piece is creation, creating something from nothing. Like, we always talk about, oh, AI can do all this incredible video creation, the Sora thing from ChatGPT or from OpenAI now, and like all of these DALL-E and Midjourney and all these things to create this new piece. It's not actually creating something new. It's just taking all of this information that it already knows and conglomerating it into one and relating all of these things together. So connection and creation are things that humans can do best. But when we leave that piece up to AI to do and not understanding that we need to guide it, we need to give it definitions and rules to follow before it can actually do a thing. That's where prompt engineering becomes so finicky, right? And that's why it becomes dangerous, because that finicky piece is the exact reason why humans are best at what they do, is because they make those connections, they have that reasoning, they have that, no, that just doesn't make sense, like this inherent ability. But AI doesn't have that, because we blanket this whole thing of AI, but really it's just like this one little piece that doesn't actually have the ability to connect all the dots. And so when we're talking about how we can mitigate that dangerous word of AI, is we need to understand that it's not a blanket term, like it's not a end all be all, it's not a silver bullet. We have to give it guidelines, rules, definitions. The more we understand what we're trying to do at the end goal, anything, like whether we're trying to make a sale or create some piece of content or create a plan or some calendar integration or whatever it is, it doesn't matter. Whatever we're trying to do, we need to understand the goals, the outcomes, the rules, the definitions, what things mean, the context behind everything. The more we can give AI the context of everything it needs to know, that's when it becomes incredibly powerful and amazing. But if we don't do that and we let it run, that's where it becomes dangerous and scary. So for example, one of the mistakes that just happened with, I think it was an airline. They had AI response. Have you heard about this? Have you guys heard about this?
Yeah, the chat bot that
The
said,
chat
yeah, you can
bot.
get a refund. And
Uh-huh.
then they turned out not to be the case, and the airline got sued.
Yeah, exactly. And so the airline got sued because they didn't give the chatbot didn't have enough guidelines and definitions to go down this piece of what actually qualifies for a refund. And what are all the bits and pieces? What are all the use cases? And that's where software engineers in general, we think of this stuff. We think of what's going to go wrong. Like, where are all the use cases? Where are the edge cases that we need to track and shut those doors so that AI won't go through them? Because AI will every time. If we're thinking about the AI that everybody's talking about, a chatbot, for example, we need to shut those doors and give that guidelines of pieces of information. And a lot of people try to do it just through prompt engineering, which is fine. And they've made it really easy to do. They've made it like really cool to have this JSON kind of format. And now the agents, and you can like do all these combinations to really make that a little bit more manageable for a person that doesn't know how to code. But in the bottom, in the like the nitty gritty of it, there's so much underneath AI that we can do to make those buckets fit and make those guidelines really go through in order for that never to happen of giving some random refund and some illegitimate information, because then that's where it gets dangerous. That's where it just goes rogue and does some crazy stuff that we were never expecting, and the hallucinations come in. It's because we didn't define it well enough for its goals, for the limits it can do, and for the things that we need it to respond to and the intakes of where it's coming from.
Mark, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this as well then, because here's my take is AI, to your point, is a big bucket of things. It's not just conversational intelligence, LLMs, and a lot of the things that have been in the spotlight. And if you look at like the top so many AI companies, there's a ton of them that most people will never have heard of. And more to the point of where, as you mentioned, this is a little dangerous and from my perspective, and we're going to bring this back to HubSpot in a second, but I recently saw a commercial about how there is a company, and I can't remember which one, but there's a company that effectively wants to facilitate the use of AI for things like chatbots and chat systems. And I think that Amazon was one of the ones where they were saying, like, we're now leveraging more AI to like facilitate conversations so you don't have to speak to a human. And where I see people abusing this is in instances where people go in and they know how to make the bot say, yeah, sure, here's your refund, right? To the point of the airline, right? Here, let's figure out how to get past the guardrails. Anytime we as humans build something, there are other humans who like to figure out how to break it and work around it. And the danger tying this back to HubSpot for like leadership that might be listening to this is if you're using artificial intelligence, know where your guardrails are, make sure you have guardrails, and be on the lookout for people who are going to break them either intentionally or unintentionally, because inevitably, no matter how strong we make artificial intelligence, and Tanner, you may have a counterpoint here, right? But no matter how strong we make artificial intelligence, people are going to find a way to break or abuse it or make it do something it probably shouldn't. So, Mark, Tanner, I'll let you two give me your thoughts, but
First,
I
real
think
quick,
that's so important.
I'll let Mark chat, but everybody breaks stuff all the time. It's to be expected.
Yeah, I agree with the concept that AI is dangerous, but I think it's dangerous not in the way that maybe science fiction, at least today, that
Yes.
it's not Terminator. Anyone who interacts with AI and tries to get it to do stuff and fails knows that this is not going to become sentient. It's not going to wake up tomorrow and have feelings and set off nuclear weapons on its own. It's just not there yet. It comes down, it's just math that's happening in the background, but we're easily tricked by it. Yeah. But no, I think eventually, one day, there will be a way to secure these the way we have other security stuff online with you can't just hack into things. But the way it is today, it's very easy to manipulate these things almost immediately when, for example, ChatGPT put out the GPT library. There was a guy on GitHub that basically got every single prompt that was powering them. So if you go on GitHub, so the prompt is basically the instructions that make a custom GPT custom. People want to hold on to that. It's like intellectual property, but it was very easy to trick the GPT itself to give you their instructions, and there's a whole library of them. And I think from the day that ChatGPT was released, there were edgelords out there trying to get it to say really messed up stuff and then taking screenshots of it, and then all these kind of guardrails were put in place. There was went overboard maybe, and that's kind of what we saw with the release of Gemini and some of the funny instances about that. So what I'm saying is, for me personally, there's a lot of AI assistants that I have set up. For example, I have an AI that has all the knowledge base documents for DealHub. And I use it personally to answer questions that people have in community, but I would never release it to the public. And that's because I just don't trust it. And I don't trust the people interacting with it. There are too many variables. I don't even really share it internally. This is like a tool I use, and I have a bunch of things like that. I think one day we'll probably have a better way of creating guardrails, but today they're just too easily manipulated.
Yeah, that's a great clarification, Mark, where it's not the fact that AI is dangerous. It's the fact that humans who suck and are imperfect using AI are dangerous. That's
The
like the
AI
key.
isn't anything. The AI is AI. It hasn't. I think we spend so much time. What's it called when you give human characteristics to something that's not human? We anthropomorphize
Mhm.
AI and refer to it as a being that has motivation. It's not. It's just AI is. It basically a sum of the inputs that we give it. If that makes any sense.
It does,
Does to
and
me.
I am going to be so curious to see what this conversation looks like by the time inbound rolls around. I'll be curious to hear Dharmesh's takes and his thoughts because I'm sure he will have some statements to give on artificial intelligence.
Oh, you think they're going to talk about artificial intelligence at Inbound?
Who knows? It's a mystery, TBD. And with that in mind, Tanner, I want to give you any last minute thoughts for anyone who's thinking about implementing AI, if they're weighing Avoma, Gong, Next Level, and just a general sentiment to those who are thinking about rolling this out and using AI to enable sales reps.
Yeah, first of all, I'm gonna throw out a disclaimer that we just built this in December. So there are things that are still, we are still working on and making it really good. And if you're willing to be a beta customer and try it out with us and make it awesome, like we can't accept any more betas, but if you're willing to work with us and pay some money for sure, then we're willing to work with you guys and make this a kick-ass product for sure. But I would say my last piece of advice or thoughts would be I don't think this is new, and I feel like a lot of people feel this way, but the more you play around and accept it and don't fear it, because there are two things that happen. People fear what they don't understand, and they're afraid of what they don't know. And so when we don't know what we don't understand, we go into this crazy, like hectic spiral of the world is going to be destroyed. So play around with it and just get to know it, and then do a little study, understand what actually happens in the end. Like you don't need to be a computer science electrical engineer like to understand how it works. It's not as difficult as you might think and a high level. Just like understanding those high level principles like the vector database. Hopefully that was helpful to see what that means. That's a piece that AI can really bring us into, like ground us a little bit. So just dig in, learn a little bit, go through a couple YouTube videos, understand it, write it down, what you know, and then keep going. It'll take you a month max. If you're watching a 1 hour video every day for a month, that's it, only a month of what AI is, what it does, everything that lives within it, you will have a different understanding.
I think it's important that for everyone who has been following us, we have continuously had guests on and been echoing the sentiment that AI is here to stay. Obviously, it's changing the way the world works, but it is also enhancing people who are using it in a healthy way. And so, for sales reps that really want to supercharge themselves, Next Level is a great example of an application that in and of itself is relatively straightforward. You have a conversation, it brings information into HubSpot, and it auto updates stuff, which can save you time. And then when we extrapolate that out to other areas and roles, it's a great way to do things that otherwise might be manual. So is it going to take jobs? It might take some. Is it going to enhance jobs? It will enhance some, but just be aware of the tools and resources that you have at your disposal. And I think you will probably be delighted at everything AI can do for you. Tanner, hopefully that's a thumbs up with that sentiment, Mark.
Two thumbs up.
I would think you would agree.
It sounded like a commercial for AI. So
That's it, right? For everyone, if this is your first time listening, or if you've been a long time fan of us, hopefully the many of you are. If you aren't already a member of the Sparketeer group, make sure you join us. We are the largest independent community for HubSpot admin. We've got the links to all of this in the show notes. We also have the HubSpot admin user group hosted by Deanna Gloff and Kyle Jepson. That is Tuesdays at 10 o'clock Central Time. Again, link to registers in the show notes. And if you enjoyed this conversation, or if you're interested in other HubSpot related conversations and revenue operations related conversations, you can check out past conversations on YouTube and on Spotify. Of course, also connect with Tanner, myself, and Mark on LinkedIn. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and Sprocket on.
See you next week.